Hello and welcome to this review of my Fujitsu FM Towns keyboard. I got this years ago off of eBay, back when I still bought keyboards. I've been meaning to cover it for a while now, but other stuff keeps coming up, you know how it is. Anyway, finally I have an open slot, so I can tell you all about it. The FM Towns line was a series of 32-bit PCs released starting in 1989 that lasted through most of the 90s. It was named after physics Nobel Prize winner Charles Towns. It was the first PC in the world to be fitted with a CD-ROM drive as standard, and Fujitsu themselves describe it as a hypermedia PC, you know, whatever that means. It was mainly intended for multimedia applications and games, and in 1993 they even released a video game console derivative of it, the FM Towns Marty. But despite being pretty powerful for gaming PCs, in fact I think the Marty was the first 32-bit gaming console, they both sold pretty poorly, partly due to being expensive, and partly due to competition from both NEC, who were quite dominant in its native Japan, and the Western IBM PC standard, which was taking over pretty much everything at the time. Notably, the Town systems featured a fairly sizable amount of hentai porn games, which is perhaps why there are still a small number of Towns aficionados to this day. Unfortunately, as with most old Fujitsu boards, it's not readily convertible. Fujitsu was fond of using weird old protocols, and the plug itself isn't very helpful either. So I couldn't do the customary week-long testing phase, but I can still give you some insights into what it's like to type on it. Fujitsu shifted quite a few keyboards as they made them for their own systems, similar to how IBM and NEC did it. Although I have no experience with any Fujitsu computers myself, I can vouch for the quality of their keyboards. I've reviewed multiple Fujitsu keyboards in the past, and the worst was probably this one, the FKB4700, which had better build quality than a Model M, even if it had crappier switches. In terms of pure build quality, this, like the MBC885, which is another contemporary board from Fujitsu that I've previously reviewed, isn't quite as tough as the FKB4700, but it's still pretty respectable, and they both have much better switches. The FM Towns has a steel mounting plate, and like the FKB4700, there's tons of screws on the inside holding the assembly together, 22 in this case. Although the outer housing isn't the toughest I've ever seen, it's a little bit floppy. It's a little bit over 1.5 kilos, or in imperial units, 1760 inch in height feet yards. I mean, I don't even... whatever, man. At the back you can see Fujitsu's typical simple flip-out feet, these little hoop things. I've seen them on other boards as well. The most disappointing is that it's not held together by screws, but by these stupid plastic clips, and the two that were in the middle here were so tight that I couldn't loosen them for the life of me, so they snapped off when I opened the case. I hate it when companies do that. Just fucking put in some screws, you lazy bastards. At the back you can also see the model sticker, by the way. The model number is FMT-KB205. This one is from October of 1989. The switches are Fujitsu's leaf spring switches of the 3rd generation, which appears to be the most common of the 4. I haven't tried the 4th one myself yet, which is basically like this but much cheaper. So far I think number 3 is the best. They're linear, very light, just 40 grams, and exceptionally smooth for a contact-based switch due to their unique and very clever design, which is one of the very few key switch designs that don't incorporate a coil spring at all. Instead, the switch is both operated and tensioned by the eponymous leaf spring, which is this curious looking thing here, which acts as an actuator as well as a return spring. The slider presses upon it, and it in turn presses on a switch plate vaguely similar in design to Alps SKCM switch plates, although they don't quite work the same. Basically, it's got contact pins at the bottom that you connect by pressing this metal plate on the inside onto to complete a circuit. Uniquely, because the slider and actuator are in line rather than orthogonal to each other, the switch doesn't rely on a camming action to close, which is how most contact-based switch series, like Cherry MX, Alps SKCM, Space Invaders, and countless others do it. However, this lack of a camming action means that the actuation method is almost frictionless, and as a result the switch feels extremely smooth. It probably also helps that the traditional friction between the slider and the coil spring is absent, so in a way you could consider this a contactless-like contact-based switch, curiously. Now, I said earlier that these are linear, and really they are, but in contrast to my other FLS boards, these have a very faint clicky sound and tactile event. Now, FLS3 is known to have a weakly clicky variant, and I don't know, this might be it, but both the tactility and the clicky noise are so weak that it's actually hard to determine for a fact. I also can't visually determine it because both types of switches appear to look the same internally. The difference is that the copper-colored circle thing, which is effectively that which bridges the contacts below if it's pressed down enough, is not flexible but instead inverts a bit, just like a plate spring or a jam jar. Now this does actually appear to be happening here, trying these switches out, but again, both the tactile event and the clicky noise are so weak that it's hard to be 100% certain. FLS3 are among the smoothest switches in existence, but since the emergence of modern contactless switches, such as Hall effect and optoelectric, these have become pretty much obsolete. Still, they're a lot of fun to use, if you can actually get it to speak to your computer, that is. I should note that the force progression for these switches is fairly unique, and not everyone likes this sort of weight profile. It's more exponential than truly linear, not counting the minute tactility, of course. Personally, I like them, I think they feel cool to type on, and despite there having been quite a lot of dust in this keyboard originally, they still feel very smooth, thankfully. However, I have only one Fujitsu leaf spring keyboard that's actually usable, which is this Tandy 3000 keyboard, which speaks XT. Thankfully that's easy enough to convert, but Lord knows how I'd ever get any of these others to work, as I have no personal experience with mapping a matrix. The keycaps are extremely distinctive of Fujitsu and also extremely good. They're Fujitsu's Tombstone keycaps, which are double-shot boulders of ABS, 3mm thick. For reference, that's twice as thick as Cherry's and GMK's double shots, and with the sliders included, which attach so tightly to the keycaps that they often stick together, it's almost a solid block of plastic. And of course, double shot lettering is, for all intents and purposes, indelible even through the harshest use, so these are quite something. Plus, I like the fonts that Fujitsu used to use. However, their lettering isn't free of defects on this board, such as on this break key here. However, they are great for sound. Listen to this. These ones look even cooler than on my other Fujitsu boards because they use this awesome 3-tone black and grey color scheme, plus they have Japanese characters on them, which is also a bunch of extra cool points. In fact, I go as far as to say this is probably one of the better looking vintage boards out there. It's not quite a Terra Drive or a Dasher, I think, but it's still up there. The layout might seem odd to Western audiences, but it's actually not that far off from modern Japanese layouts at all. Typical aspects include the split spacebar to select from different script types, an ISO-style return key with split right shift, split backspace, and back in ye olden days, this diamond-shaped nav and 000 key were also pretty common features. I'm not quite sure what these two buttons below the spacebar are for, or this lone key below the nav, or why it's only got PF or programmable function keys rather than normal function keys, but having 20 dedicated macro keys on your keyboard can't be a bad thing, I guess. Also, for some reason the homing bumps are more accurately described as homing bars. I've never seen anything quite like this before, and there's 4 of them rather than 2. To be honest, the layout does look like it would be very usable indeed on a modern Western system with some remapping. Note that only 3 of the keys are stabilized, despite there being quite a few other keys in there that are pretty big. They still feel fairly good in practice though. It's genuinely a pretty good switch design if you don't mind the exponential force curve. Overall, this is a really cool board. It's a shame I can't use it on my computer because I'd love to give it a spin. Like I said, there's not much point in it technically if you can just buy a modern contactless keyboard, but it looks really cool and it feels pretty good. Nice job as usual, Fujitsu. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.